when a massive tsunami slammed into the Japanese coast. It destroyed all in its path and triggered the biggest nuclear crisis in a generation. 5 years on, the fallout continues. The cleanup job is enormous, and no one knows just how to fix it. I'm Steve Chow. On this episode, 101 East journeys into the radioactive heart of the Fukushima time bomb.
It's a stunning landscape of verdant forest, sheer mountains and meandering streams. Aside to Fukushima, few outsiders get to experience. And after the nuclear fallout drifted and settled here, few would now want to. The higher you climb up into the mountains, the higher the reading on the Geiger counter. Nestled in the valleys or hidden away in the mountains are hundreds of hamlets like this. Irradiated, abandoned and now overgrown. But the man I am on my way to visit doesn't fear the fallout. Having refused to leave his Fukushima farm just a few kilometres from the melted reactors, Nato Matsumura is often described as the most contaminated person in Japan.
最初はもうとんでもないぐらい寂しかったけど、今は慣れでそんなこと全然ない。
Helping Nato Matsumura combat the loneliness is his collection of stray animals. Today, like every day, he's back inside the nuclear no-go zone in the village of Tomioka to feed some abandoned cattle that can never be sold or leave the zone.
もうはっきり言って誰の牛だかわかんないの。ほとんど誰の牛だかわかんない。ただ当時みんなもう牛をもう置いて逃げてったから。
Tomioka is where Nato Matsumura was born. The empty streets, the abandoned shops, the train station to nowhere, none of it bothers him. Neither does the fact that nature is slowly reclaiming what people have left behind. It's spring, so Matsumura takes me to a nearby village once renowned for its natural beauty. This is the village of Yonomori inside the nuclear no-go zone, and this is its famous Sakuradori, cherry blossom street. These blooms have come out 5 times since the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and it's been 5 years since anyone sat here to eat, drink, celebrate the annual cherry blossoms. While we marvel at the blossoms, the loudspeakers in this empty village crackle into life with a daily announcement from the Safety Affairs Office. In 30 minutes, the no-go zone will close. Please leave the area immediately, it says. But not even these abundant, beautiful blooms can distract from the truth of this contaminated landscape. All over the polluted zone, thousands of workers are busy scraping up the topsoil into large black bags. And only from the air can you appreciate the sheer scale of this operation. So far, more than 10 million of these bags have been filled. They're then stacked at thousands of separate locations across the contamination zone. Despite the efforts so far, more than 1,100 square kilometres of Fukushima's forests, mountains and villages remain uninhabitable. dozens of communities still haven't been touched. More than 160,000 people were forced to evacuate during and after the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. Now, 5 years on, 100,000 still have not returned. Some remain trapped in tiny temporary apartments, while others say they'll never return to these contaminated communities. Most of those forced to flee the radiation will forever remain nuclear refugees, according to the man who was Prime Minister during the disaster, Nato Khan.
小さな子供を持つ母親のような方は、除染が進んでも、やはり 3.11 前に比べれば放射線量が高いので帰りたくないという人たちもいます。
But a few have come back.
私がね、おそらく一番早かったんじゃないかと思います。ここに戻ってきたの。それで私はここに戻ってきて奈良派町民をね、なんとか私が最初戻ってきてみんなが戻ってこれるようなね、そういう形を取りたいというような考えでここへ戻ってきたので。
It was nearly 5 years before Azuma and Yumiko Hashimoto were allowed to return to their decontaminated home in Naraha town. Mrs. Hashimoto's family has lived in this house for 8 generations. But that looks like where the line will end, because her daughter is refusing to return with her 1-year-old son. In fact, Naraha is now a village without children, because no one with a family wants to come back.
いやー、やっぱり子供の声が聞こえないっていうのは寂しいです。もう夜なんかは静まり帰っちゃう。それから夫婦2人だってね、食事済んでお風呂に入って、あとはもう会話がないですから、もうすぐ寝ちゃうしね。
だから。
The silence is particularly haunting for Azuma Hashimoto, because for years he was in charge of disaster prevention at both of Fukushima's nuclear plants.
まさかこういうあれになるとは思わなかったから、やはり今になってみると、やはり原子力発電所が来て町が潤った形なんだけども、最終的には、グラニュライターすらおかしいけどね、グラニュライターみたいな形になってしまったわけですよね。だから今それが私としては納得いかないしね、まだ。
I've been invited by the plant operator Tepco to spend a day touring the sprawling facility and to meet the man in charge of decontaminating and decommissioning the Fukushima plant, Naohiro Masada. Has anything like this ever been attempted before?
この福島第一のようにですね、3つのプラントが事故を起こして燃料が溶け落ちてしまったという原子力発電所はありませんので、30年から40年をかけて廃炉まで仕事を進めようというタイムテーブルを今書いているわけです。
The former Prime Minister, now a fierce opponent of nuclear power, disagrees.
私はもっとかかると思ってます。世界で従来起きたことのない非常に大きな事故でした。ですからそういう意味では私は40年というのは楽観的な見方だと思っています。
For the initial part of our tour of the nuclear plant, we are kitted out in light protection gear. And our first stop is a reminder of the colossal task facing Tepco. So this is the tank area. So here we've got over 1,000 tanks on this site. Tepco's removing about 62 nuclear substances from the water. The only one they can't remove is tritium. Tritium goes directly into the soft tissues and organs of the human body, potentially increasing the risk of cancer. The site has nearly reached its capacity, with more than 500,000 tonnes of contaminated water, much of it pumped in to keep the melted reactor fuel from heating up again.
そのままにしておくと海に流れる可能性がありますから、それをしっかり取り除くというのも大事です。
But on top of that, every day 150 tonnes of groundwater flows into the plant, and some believe this poses the biggest threat of all.
What concerns me is the volume of water that exists at the site. This water contamination problem is not under control, and it's not really controllable. There really isn't any way to stop it.
Particle physicist Gregory Yotzko was the chairman of the United States atomic watchdog when Fukushima melted down. He was getting real-time information as the disaster unfolded. He warns that the task of keeping 3 melted reactors stable and then cleaning them up will take decades.
It's a very, very difficult situation. There is no simple solution. There is no silver bullet that is going to put a stop to everything and make this just go away overnight.
We've spent several hours around the plant already, but we're going closer to the reactor buildings now, which means we've got to put on more heavy-duty protective gear. Good. We're all set to go. For this part of our tour, we are accompanied by 5 minders because we are heading to the buildings housing the melted reactors, and there are restrictions. Tepco is worried about possible nuclear terrorism and won't allow us to film certain security sites.
Reactor 1, Reactor 2, Reactor 3 with all the rubble over there. So be very careful.
The radiation spikes the closer we go to the reactors, where deep inside lies the melted nuclear fuel and Tepco's greatest challenge, according to the man with possibly the toughest job in Japan, decommissioning chief Naohiro Masada.
教科書もないような初めてやる仕事ですから、作業員の被曝をいかに抑えていくか、その中で仕事をいかに進めていくか、これをバランスを取りながら仕事をやるというのが非常に大きなチャレンジだと思っています。一番難しい問題だと思っております。
I'm just meters away from the main reactor buildings here at the Fukushima nuclear plant. Behind me, Reactor 3. Now, we saw what happened there. There was a hydrogen explosion right after the nuclear fuel melted. Next to it, Reactor 2. It's still a problem today. There was no hydrogen explosion, but what happened inside there, no one really knows because the radiation is so high. No one to this day has been able to get inside. And there is Reactor 1, and it could present particular problems for Tepco because that is where probably the worst meltdown occurred. They don't know where the nuclear fuel is, and it could take Tepco several years to even work that out.
実際にデブリ燃料がどこに溶け落ちているかはまだ見たことがありませんので、なるべく早くやはり見るというのは大事だと思います。一つのプラント大体200トンぐらいずつのものがあると思いますので、ほぼ600トンぐらいのその溶け落ちた燃料とそのコンクリートとか金属が混ざったものがある。
Very high exposure? Yeah. So it's creeping up the closer we get to the buildings, the reactor buildings. We can't stay here. Okay.
And the most daunting task, one the nuclear industry has never faced, is getting the melted fuel out. Tepco admits the technology it needs hasn't been invented yet.
They've sent in some robots. All the robots have been disabled because of the high radiation fields. It may be possible that you were never able to remove the fuel. You may just wind up having to leave it there and somehow entomb it as it is. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. There's no playbook. They're making this up as they go along, and that's in a lot of ways the best they can do.
Back on the bus, we head closer to the base of the reactor buildings. We hop off at Reactor 4 and start to move down the line.
So 157, 55.
Immediately, the radiation level begins to rise.
What's happening? High. Okay, so we're just between Reactor 4 and Reactor 3, but the radiation level has gone up to a point where our Tepco guides are not comfortable going any further. So we'll head back.
これはですね、東京電力だけでできるようなものだとは思っていません。我々今その世界中のエキスパートの方々に一緒に見てもらって仕事のやり方をチェックしてもらったり、一緒に判断をしてもらったりしてますし。
現時点で政府が東電に、いわば支援で出しているお金が6兆円です。しかし、それだけでは全く足りません。 多分20兆円以上の費用がかかると思われます。
For others, the cost of the disasters can never be measured in dollar terms. Well, we've just crossed into the no-go zone, just a couple of kilometres north of the nuclear plant. We're heading to Norio Kimura's house, or what remains of it. His is one of the more tragic stories to come out of the tsunami. Not only did he lose his father and his wife, but he also lost his little daughter Yuna. And every now and then he comes back to Fukushima and he still searches for her remains because she's the only person still listed as missing from Okuma town, just north of the plant. I first met Norio Kimura several years ago. Today, he's again out searching for any trace of little Yuna. He and his volunteers are only allowed into the no-go zone for 5 hours at a time. Soon, Kimura is approached by some police who ask us not to film them or what they have found. After a few minutes, he returns with a bag. It contains some family photos the police have found in the piles of debris, and for Kimura, something else far more precious.
ユーナの幼稚園の時の体操着 T シャツですね。
How do you feel when you see Yuna's shirt like this?
本当にこうね、ユーナはね、いるわけではないけど、彼女がここにいた証でもあるし、それを感じられるっていうのは本当に今の自分にとっては最大の喜びっていうか、幸せな瞬間ではあります。
We take the photos and Yuna's top to a nearby temple, where Norio Kimura keeps everything he has found belonging to his dead family.
なんつうんだろう、運動会。
His father's body was found inland not long after the tsunami. His wife's remains were found floating off the Fukushima coast weeks later. At this shrine, he adds the latest finds, including Yuna's kindergarten top. Deep down, he knows his youngest daughter will never be found.
彼女を本当に見つけ出すっていうのは確率はかなり低い、とっても難しいことだっていうのは分かってるんですけど、やっぱりやめちゃったらそれがねゼロになってしまうんで、ね、まだ望みがないとは言えないんで、ずっと続けていきたいんですけどね。
Norio Kimura's community inside the fallout zone will never be rebuilt. In fact, it's destined to be the site of a dump for contaminated waste and soil. But further north, outside the zone, there's hope. I've returned to Rikuzen Takeda, which was wiped out by a 13-metre-high tsunami. I arrived here in 2011, right after the waves, to be greeted by scenes of devastation and death. No survivors are being pulled out of here, just hundreds and hundreds of bodies. 5 years on, I'm back in this exact same spot. And in the end, 1 in every 10 of Rikuzen Takeda's residents would die in the tsunami. The debris is all gone now, replaced by 5 million cubic tonnes of earth scraped off a nearby mountain and put in the city centre. That's in the hope that this community can be raised by up to 13 metres to protect itself from future tsunamis. Rikuzen Takeda is a fishing town. And Yoshiharu Yoshida is one of its shrewdest sea dogs. And when the earth shuddered 5 years ago, the fisherman was one of those who jumped on their boats and headed straight out into the Pacific, riding over the tsunami as it rolled towards the coast.
一晩船の上で明かして、で朝明るくなってからこう入ってきたんですけど、もう瓦礫だらけで、なかなか一回ここに来たんですけど、もうここも瓦礫いっぱいで入れなくて、じゃあ別などこに行こうっていうことで戻って。
As well as the earthworks to raise the town, authorities are building towering seawalls, some more than 5 stories high. They're part of a 400-kilometre chain of gigantic tsunami defences being built along the coast of northeast Japan. But fisherman Yoshiharu Yoshida scoffs at the idea that concrete walls can repel the raw power of a tsunami.
防げないじゃないですか。この間のああいうの来たらもうまた同じことの繰り返しみたいな感じで、別な町なんですけど、堤防ができてるやつ見ると、なんでこんな高いの作んなきゃなんないのとか、全然海見えないんじゃない、反対に怖いんじゃないかっていう人たちも今出てきました。
While some communities outside the zone rebuild, others in the contaminated areas continue to crumble and wither. Few spots symbolise both the natural and nuclear disasters of 2011 better than the Ukeido Primary School. Here, the tsunami smashed through the bottom floor, while the top floor remained untouched, except by the radioactive fallout from the nuclear plant just a few kilometres away. The 80 children of this school survived the waves, but they've never been back. Some former supporters of atomic energy now believe the risks are just too great, including those who had to deal directly with the fallout at the time.
今日はっきりしてきたのは、まず原発は、他のエネルギーに比べて危険性が高い。つまり従来は本来コストに、として考えるべき事故の時の費用とか、あるいはその使用済み燃料、つまりは核廃棄物の処理の費用とか、そういうものをコストにカウントしないことによって安いと言ってきたんですが。
You were the Prime Minister of Japan at the time. How close did this country come to all-out disaster?
非常に近いところまで行きました。これらの10基の原発全てがメルトダウンに陥った時には、日本の半分ぐらい、あるいは日本全部がですね壊滅する、そういう危険がありました。ある意味ではそのギリギリの瀬戸際まで、この事故は瀬戸際まで来た事故でした。
You have to now accept that at all nuclear power plants, wherever they are in the world, that there's a chance you can have this kind of a very catastrophic accident, and you can release a significant amount of radiation and have a decade-long cleanup effort on your hands. And that's the reality of nuclear power.
My journey ends on a beach I first visited after the disasters. Then I went in with police in radiation protection gear to search this area for bodies left behind by the tsunami. The beach is empty now, silent except for the waves. But just down the shore, hidden behind this outcrop, is the Fukushima nuclear plant, its stacks visible in the distance. The waves that crashed over this coast 5 years ago caused the costliest natural disaster in human history. But the nuclear drama continues to play out inside this secluded facility, and will do for decades to come.